When I'm feeling depressed, I shut down every connection with people around me. I don't access Messenger or SNS because those will make me more miserable. I can see how others are progressing with their lives while I'm not doing anything with mine. I get lost in the apparent stagnation of my existence, like I'm running on a treadmill, going nowhere, fast. I get sleepy, I binge a lot, I keep myself occupied with nonsense in order to distract myself from reality, but I do nothing that requires cognitive power. Something simple and light. I crave instant gratification. I don't want to go outside. I don't want to meet my friends because I am not myself. Actually, I hate myself. Does this sound familiar? Perhaps you have felt this way, or a friend has shared a piece of this experience with you. This is depression, and it's all around us. I'm fairly certain that your encounters with depression are not identical to those I have just described, but it's probable that there are similarities. Now, it is old news that depression have different causes and symptoms, that it has different ways that it can manifest itself onto people's lives, for those who are depressed and for those around them. But this led me to wonder, how can the same clinical condition reveal itself in so many different ways? Psychologists generally agree that there is no one single cause for depression, that it can arise from childhood trauma, genetic vulnerability, recent traumas, or just seemingly random events that can all trigger this complicated response. Neurologists, on the other hand, they might tell you that depression stems from a disconnect in the prefrontal cortex, frontal cortex, and the hypothalamus, resulting in the body producing abnormally low amounts of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine, all hormones the body needs to function normally. In plain language, it basically means that there's a disconnect between the logical part of your brain and the feely-touchy part of your brain. And that makes your body manifest a state of dysfunction. Depression can be elusive, evasive. It can permeate everything and everyone. And it can seem to be very similar to that of air pollution. You see, depending on the severity of it, air pollution can make people cough. It can cause severe headaches. It can also cause depression, but let's not get too meta. Air pollution makes the air gray, ugly, unbreathable, and the earth uninhabitable. But what if I told you that air pollution isn't like depression? That instead depression is more like the fossil fuels that cars and factories burn that create the effects of air pollution we experience. Air pollution is merely a symptom of a bigger problem. It is a system operating in dysfunction. Likewise, the symptoms of depression are not depression itself. For the sake of the metaphor, opting into buying N95 masks, air purification machines, or choosing to stay inside while ignoring the causes of air pollution won't actually fix the issue. If we don't tune into the actual causes for depression and merely at the symptoms, we're back on that treadmill, going nowhere. I contend that maladaptive coping mechanisms are among the strongest precursors. Now, maladaptive coping mechanisms are unhealthy ways to process information. And Freud, yes, this Freud, the dude who made us realize we all have daddy issues, he differentiated these maladaptive coping mechanisms into 4 categories. First, we have denial. We all know about this one. Second, we have reaction formation, which is behaving the opposite of how you should feel. Then, we have displacement, which is releasing your stress onto something lesser than you. It's kind of like squishing an ant and then saying, you're going to die anyways. And lastly, we have sublimation, which is converting something socially unacceptable into something that is socially approved. Which is kind of like saying fossil fuels and air pollution is totally fine because it nurtures the economy and makes people money. Now, these are just a few among many different types of maladaptive coping mechanisms, and perhaps you are familiar with one of these. Repetitively thinking or worrying about the same event, distracting yourself from difficult situations and not thinking about it, consciously trying to push negative thoughts or feelings into the unconscious mind, reducing work ethic or focus when faced with difficult situations, or avoiding problems with attention fixed on other menial activities, or maybe assigning self-guilt. All of these strategies don't address the root cause of the problem. In fact, the more times these strategies are used, the worse depressive symptoms can become. And for that, you can thank the neurons in your brain. Now, neurons process sensory input from outside the world into our brains. They're kind of like channels or canals. And over time, as certain behaviors are reinforced into habits, these channels can become so deep that they form ravines. And you can become trapped in destructive patterns. You can feel like there is no way up and no way out. Andrew Solomon famously said that depression is a lack of vitality. In other words, depression makes us lose motivation. Alfred Adler, in his theory of human motivation, said it all stems from a perpetual striving for superiority, that we all have an inherent need to be better than others. Now, it stands to reason, as a sexually reproductive species, in order to pass genes that survive to the next generation, one human must exhibit a trait superior than another human in order to successfully attract a mate and reproduce. And since millions of years have passed since the origins of the first human, every human on this planet currently must exhibit the DNA to want to be better than others. Now, if depression is a lack of motivation is a perpetual striving for superiority, then we can conclude that depression stems from a feeling of inferiority in life. And this feeling of inferiority can lead to further lacking motivation, and it ends up being a cycle for the struggle of power against oneself. But what if I told you that we can change the perception of inferiority and superiority in our lives? People are born with different genetic dispositions and predispositions, and information is innately objective. Information doesn't make us feel a certain way. It is our perception, interpretation of information as filtered through our biases that gives information meaning at all. And depending on who we are, we may feel inferior for a myriad of different reasons. There is only one determining factor that will decide on how we end up feeling. And that is how we cope with life events. All of my life, I've been surrounded by people who are depressed. When I was 9, my best friend's mother committed suicide because of depression. And my best friend soon left school afterwards, and I haven't talked to him since. When I was 14, another one of my best friends left school because he was diagnosed with chronic depression. And it happened again to another one of my friends 2 years later, and so on. These situations taught me that it's a pretty common occurrence to see someone drop out of school or lose someone they love, all because of depression. About 6 months ago, My own mother told me that she felt depressed because she couldn't make friends since moving to Korea. When I first heard the news, I was surprised because I thought she was someone who would never be susceptible to depression. But then reflecting upon the past few years of my life, I realized I couldn't recall the last time I had a long and meaningful conversation with her, or the last time I genuinely asked her how she was doing and sat long enough to process her response. People who are struggling benefit from connection because we all benefit from connection. The very pathways in our brains require healthy ways to connect. And when faced with a depressive chapter, sometimes we can all use a little bit of revitalization. And if we aren't able to manage those stresses by ourselves, having someone there to listen can really help. It's analogous to helping someone who might be stuck to exit what might otherwise feel like an everlasting treadmill of despair. Imagine, at times like these, the comfort of realizing we no longer have to tread alone. If depression is prolonged sadness or stress resulting from how we do or don't deal with stress and chemical imbalances in our lives, having someone to listen can really make a difference. And that's where you come in. When was the last time you asked this to someone and truly stuck around to process what they had to say? Having an outside perspective to listen to you reminds that people care. And there is a whole world outside of our depression. When functioning normally, we can more easily take a situation objectively and not take it personally. But when we're not functioning normally, the same otherwise trivial challenge can become an insurmountable hurdle. Awareness of any threatening situation is a crucial first step. Avoiding the problem only causes further damage. When we turn a blind eye to air pollution, it can become so progressively potent to the point where ignoring it simply won't be an option anymore. It can become so serious where we either have to fix it or we die. Issues are rarely as simple as they seem. Removing cars off the road and factories from industry won't eliminate air pollution because air pollution, like depression, is a result of complicated behaviors and systems. Together, we have to raise awareness that even stigmatized issues exist. And it affects all of us. And there are better ways and healthier ways to deal with them. Depression will continue to pollute our lives and relationships if we let it. If we don't tune into the actual causes, and if we don't shift our habits and behaviors to cope more effectively. Any one of us, at some point or another, may fall susceptible to the suffocating grasp of depression. So let's not suffer alone. What if instead we work together to lift the fog of misunderstanding and shift our behavior to clear the air once and for all? Thank you.